Thank you. The gentleman from Texas yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. And look, for Congressman Green, I mean, let's be honest. You know, we're almost like oceans apart as a traditional Democrat, as a conservative Republican, and yet, since the day I've been here, you've always been remarkably kind to me. You are one of my little girl's favorite people because you're sweet to her. And I think it's a demonstration that we may see lots of the world differently. And you know, I'm passionately trying to convince you that the morality of making people healthier is the most powerful thing we can do in income inequality and some of the afflictions that exist in our society today. So one day I'm gonna close that deal. But thank you for being so kind to my family and I. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, this one's gonna be a little thick, and I apologize right now to the person who has to try to keep these words down. Last Friday, we issued the Joint Economic Report. Joint Economic Report, the Joint Economic Committee actually has a really neat history. 1956, I think it was chartered. If you actually, I'm right now finishing up the autobiography of Milton Friedman, and he talks about the number of times, he came in front of the committee and presented ideas. It's a unique committee. It's Senate, House, and you rotate the chairmanship back and forth between the Senate and the House. So this year, Heinrich in the Senate has chairmanship. I had the vice chairmanship. If we're blessed to remain in the majority and the Speaker so chooses to let me keep the chairmanship, it comes back to me. But as Republicans, we tried to do something last year and this year, and that was, instead of just taking shots at the president's economic reports, the president's budget, we actually not only pointed out where they were wrong mathematically, but we also pointed out solutions. But the hardest part here is trying to get the head around this place, the thinking around this place, the intellectual calcification that is this place, and to get them to understand the baseline math and how incredibly difficult it is. And I'm going to say this 3 or 4 times as we're going through this. I know we're in the time of election year math. So like last night's debate, there were a couple moments where I had to shut the television off because I'm bouncing off the ceiling saying, that's my president. And like what he said about Social Security, if we tax rich people by like 1% or so, we're fine. I've done presentation after presentation after presentation here with 5 PhD economists showing, hey, raise the cap for everyone over $400,000, you cover about 38% of the shortfall. Mr. President, learn your math, because when you say that in front of a national audience, you steal away the seriousness of how do we have a discussion, a debate, a mechanism to actually fix a real problem, because now you have millions and millions and millions and millions of people. Well, the president said it, it must be true. You make our job so hard trying to make a calculator do its job. You know, because at some point the math is going to win, your feelings are not. So let's actually start to do some basic education of what's in the Joint Economic Report. I'm going to walk through the scale that has moved against us, some of the things in the report that we find very, very concerning, and then we're going to walk through some of our solutions. And the point we've made over and over and over and over and over is the left's tax policy. Hey, we're going to tax people over $400,000. We're going to maximize their income tax, their estate tax, their capital gains tax, all these things. You can only get about 1.5% of the GDP of the economy. For those on the conservative side, we want to cut, but if you limit your cuts to only non-defense discretionary, you can only get about 1% of GDP. Add those two together. Every tax, every cut. You got 2.5% of GDP. This year we're borrowing, what, 8? Almost 9% of GDP. Does anyone see a math problem? It turns out what's great rhetoric, great campaign slogans is crap math. So let's do some real math. First off, for all my brothers and sisters who, and if you're upset, if you're watching at home and the room's empty, that's because we're on 1,000 televisions around the campus. And part of this presentation is not only to members of Congress, but it's to their staff. Because often the staff are the ones who are young, we're talking about their future, and maybe they'll help their members understand actual math. We are now at 74% of all U.S. spending. 74% is now on autopilot, meaning 74% is mandatory spending. So the next time you have someone from the political class saying, you know, if we just get rid of foreign aid, we'll be fine, will you point out to them you just covered maybe a week and a half of borrowing? You know, if you're burning through $8 to $9 billion a day, you gotta understand, stop lying to the voters, stop making crap up, because at some point, the bond market will be the ones in charge of this country. When you're borrowing $80,000 to $100,000 a second every day, when you have to bring almost $10 trillion to market this year, both in Virgin and refinance, when the bond market gets cranky, it gets really expensive for us. So here's a point on this chart. 74% is in mandatory spending. You, Madam Speaker, and I don't get to vote on any of that. We've done it as a formula. Every dime a member of Congress now votes on is borrowed, and actually a sliver of Medicare. A sliver of even the mandatory now has to be borrowed money. So when you go home and we talk to our constituents, well, balance the budget. Okay, if I get rid of every dime of defense, we still have to borrow. If we get rid of every dime of non-defense discretionary, that's the State Department, that's the Park Service, that's the FBI, all those. You just get rid of all of government and no military. Well, those add up to, okay, you got 900 and 800. So 1.8, let's just make the math simple. We're going to borrow 2.3, maybe 2.5 trillion this year. So now come to me and tell me, find me the $500 billion in Medicare or other mandatory spending you want gone. So the next time you have someone say, just balance the budget. That's not how the math works. Every dime a member of Congress votes on today is borrowed, and a big sliver of mandatory spending now is on borrowed money. It's math. The math will win, but this place is unwilling to bathe in the facts. So let's actually walk through the part here, and we updated the chart. I don't know about the colors. This number actually got slightly better. I think there's a mistake in it because it's basically calculated that there's no recessions, no wars, no pandemics, nothing else in here. But from today through the next 30 years, the CBO update from last week basically says, hey, over the 30 years, you're going to borrow about $115, $116 trillion. 100% of the borrowing over that 30 years is demographics. How many times do you hear anyone around here say that? It's healthcare, almost all Medicare, and a decade from now when the Social Security Trust Fund is gone, do we just borrow, use general fund receipts to make up that shortfall, or will this place have the guts and a president who stops making crap up and gives us the opportunity to have a Republican, Democrat, White House, and maybe some actual econometricians and people that actually have calculators come up with a solution to actually fix it? The chart now, Social Security and Medicare run a $124 trillion deficit over the next 30 years. But the rest of the federal government has about a $9 trillion surplus because their growth rate is actually expected to run slower than the growth of tax receipts. So how do I get people to understand here? If you want to save the republic, legalize the technology, bathe in the ways to crash the price of healthcare. And we've done how many presentations here saying, here's cures. Cures are moral. Here's technology. It would free you, give you more time, make you healthier. Could we legalize it? But as I've said over and over, this place has become a protection racket. And it's a protection of incumbency, not incumbent members of Congress, incumbent bureaucracies, and often people's business models. So this board's really important. You can go to CBO, look it up yourself, or I think even Brian Riedel, Manhattan Institute, is actually trying to put out an updated deck of slides to make it easy to read. So let's actually walk through a couple other things here. We actually worked through part of this on the on our Joint Economic Report, but this one is basically straight off CBO. CBO projects that net interest and mandatory program spending will exceed revenues. Really should say receipts, because revenues are something you earn, receipts are something you confiscate, but that's sort of, will exceed revenues by $1,689 billion over the next 10 years. It's simply saying, if you actually put in the mandatory programs and the interest we owe, it consumes every dollar of tax receipts. So if you come and say, David, tomorrow I need you to balance the budget, I can do it. But you got to be prepared. You have no more military, you have no more government. We're just going to do the entitlements, the earned entitlements, earned benefits, and then pay the interest back to our bondholders. That's reality. It's called math. So, what else was in both the Joint Economic Report and then also backed up by Congressional Budget Office this last week? In 9 budget years, 9 budget years, net borrowing, we're going to talk about the difference between net borrowing and gross borrowing. Net borrowing, $50.6 trillion. Now this, when we say net, this is the stuff we have to sell to the public, to the nice family in China that takes their savings and is willing to buy a U.S. savings bond. Your retirement that goes out and buys a U.S. savings bond. We are about to continue to consume. Right now, China and the United States are basically consuming much of the world's savings, investment capital. We are just chewing it up. 9 budget years, we're over $50 trillion in publicly borrowed money. But where I think that number is a bit of a fraud is because we also take things like the money, it's in Social Security, the railroad retirement, all these others, and we also borrow that. Now, we do pay interest back, which is something that's a bit of a controversy for us on the economic side, because we'll show it as a benefit. Hey, look, we had this money, but we often don't actually show the interest we're paying back, but we owe interest. If you add in the internal borrowing, the gross borrowing in 9 budget years is $56 trillion. $56 trillion. Why isn't there a sense of panic around here? Didn't anyone bother to grab the Joint Economic Report or the CBO report? We went out of our way to write our chapters so they were readable. Yeah, it's a funky looking book. It looks like the type of thing, there'll be 12 people that will read it and it will sit on a shelf with dust on it. But if you actually give a damn, learn the math. Because in there we talk about ways to help stabilize U.S. debt. But if I come to you and right now and say in 9 budget years you are crossing $50 trillion in borrowing, why wasn't everyone that came behind these microphones this week talking about this? Am I just an idiot for coming behind this mic week after week, year after year? But I get people saying, well, I'm going to save $1 million on this amendment. And you start to go, great, I'm proud of you. Thank you for doing it. You realize we borrowed more during the debate than the amendment saves. because we're not willing to talk about the actual drivers of debt. It's healthcare costs, it's our demographics, and now it's the interest we have to pay, because United States is now number 14 on the credit stack, meaning Greece can sell a 10-year bond cheaper than the United States today. I need you to process that. One of the reasons United States bond rates are so high is, if you read the S&P, read the Moody's, someone actually, come on, I'm told a bunch of people here are literate. Read. In there it says, we don't trust the United States Congress's governance. We pay a risk premium because we don't look serious about our debt. Think of that. There's 13 other countries that get to sell a 10-year bond cheaper than the United States, and we're the reserve currency. Yes, but there'll be some troll on some fake internet site saying, well, if we just didn't give money to this, we'd be fine. Grow up. Just grow up. Deal with the reality. All right. I'm sorry. I've had a stunning amount of caffeine. And I'm unwilling to cut back. If someone can start a 12-step program for coffee, I'm going to be your first member, but I want to hold the meetings at a Starbucks. All right. Actually, I've been backed off Starbucks. Let's do BlackRock coffee or something else. All right. Interest in mandatory program spending will exceed revenues for fiscal year 24. Guess what fiscal year we're in right now? So this isn't some projection for the future. This is today. All discretionary spending is borrowed. I'm just trying to create another chart to make the point. Everything you think of as government is today borrowed. Oh, and in this, we actually think there's a couple problems on those total receipts. It's a little quirky. We give ourselves credit for interest received, but when we don't actually charge ourselves for the credit paid, that sort of stuff. But basically the point is, everything you think of as government is borrowed. When I would talk about that a few years ago, I would have members here saying, David, you've got to stop making up stuff. You're scaring my voters. Ta-da, it happened, it's real. All right, this chart's a little tougher, but I'm trying to point out the majority of income tax pays, if you actually take every dime of income tax and you add it up, this year, 36.9% of all income tax will go just to cover Medicare. And then you add in another 36.5% that's net interest. If you want to be honest, you do the gross interest, which is closer to 40%. So start to think about that. In this year, almost all the income tax is consumed by interest and Medicare. And when we go out in time, it starts being the beyond. You start having 43.1% in 9 budget years of all income tax will go to Medicare, and another 42.3 will just go to interest. And if you once again plug in all net interest, it's closer to 45. Meaning, in 9 years, all income tax, which is, remember, we're an income tax-based tax system here. The majority of U.S. receipts come from income tax. We can't cover our interest and Medicare. And we actually crossed this threshold, I think, in like 5 years. Meaning, every dime of tax you pay will basically be just covering Medicare and covering interest. Getting older, turning 65, and your earned benefits, is that Democrat? Is it Republican? It's just demographics. And I'm going to spend some time here talking about, because we spent a lot of time in the Joint Economic Report talking about what's happened in the world. But we slowed down having children in 1990. And I'm going to actually walk through a couple things here at some of the updated reports. There's a very good chance the data is now looking like last year the entire world actually decreased in population. If any of you have your economics degree or actually read, You got to start to understand what happens to a world's growth, economic vitality, GDP growth, productivity, when the entire world may be starting to shrink population-wise. So let's walk through a few more of these. Deficit reduction from granting permanent residency to legal immigrants with advanced STEM degrees. So we're going to start to walk through some of the things we say, well, you got to understand what's going on around us. If I come to you and say the population in the United States has just flattened out, and forgive the little post-it here, but even our own charts were wrong. Last year, the best data says the United States fell to 1.62 children fertility rate, basically meaning the United States population has flattened out. I'm going to show you one right here. Let's see if I can make this make sense. We're calculating that in 15 years, the United States will have more deaths than births. United States in 15 years will have more deaths than births. We are a dying society. We need to grow up and accept it and realize the morality. We can fix it. There is no society in the entire world that's been able to change its fertility rates. It's beyond me. Is it cultural? Is it economic? Is it technology? All I can tell you is country after country after country, they call it natalist policies. It hasn't worked. So maybe we should start to prepare for the morality of, is it moral to live in a country where you're having your 5th year in a row where primate males are dying younger? And we're going to talk about why. But be prepared. We're now looking at numbers that we were not supposed to see for a decade, and they're already here. Your society, go to Mass, go to your mall, go to this, and realize, look around, we're all gray hairs. And I accept, my wife and I, we're both 62, and I have a 2-year-old, turned 2 this week, and an 8-year-old. We adopted. And it took us 10 years to do that. And yes, I have the old dad problem, but maybe once you have the hug of that child, you start to say, maybe I have a moral obligation, because the math says my children, when they enter the workforce, will be poor. The first generation in U.S. history, which will be poorer than their parents. Is that moral? Because that's what we've done. Remember the charts I was showing you before of how much we're going to borrow to maintain the benefits? Remember, in 9 budget years, in 10 years, 23% of this society will be 65 and older. Okay. It's coming. It's not a black swan. It's not going to sneak up and bite us. It's a white swan. We see it. We're just going to live in avoidance because we have people like last night, my own president, say things that were mathematically absurd instead of using the moral opportunity to basically say we need to take this seriously. Those children and this senior have the right to live in a society where they can prosper, and there's things we can do policy-wise, but we're terrified to actually think because it requires thinking. So, all right. You don't need to see that one. It's basically sort of showing the collapse of populations. So let's actually walk through solutions. We spent months with economists, many of this staff are much smarter than I am, saying, okay, we already have things like the MedPAC report that was put out a month or 2 ago that actually tells us that by 2030, so just 5-some years from now, 22% of all income tax revenues are expected to be transferred to just Medicare. It's here. I mean, if any of you act surprised a few years from now, it's your own fault. It's been being handed to us week after week by the economists who are warning us. So if I came to you tomorrow and said, all right, Schweikert, we're going to do things. We're actually going to find ways to actually deal with our population flattening out, the incredibly high interest, because in fact we're just moving back to normal interest coverage and cost. Oh, by the way, we have a population that's getting older very, very fast, and they have their earned benefits. We made a deal. You earned your benefits. You worked your 40 quarters, you get your Social Security. You worked a certain amount, you get your Medicare. It is our societal contract. How do we pay for it? And if someone says, well, we're just going to grow our way out. Okay, back to the math we already did. All the taxes about 1.5% of GDP, all of our cuts, which we should do, about 1% of GDP. The baseline is borrowing about 6 to 7% of GDP. This year, we're just a couple points above that baseline. You have a massive math gap there. Our rhetoric doesn't actually match reality. So let's actually walk through one. One of the things we've talked about is if this data is true, that the entire world last year may have had zero population growth, which is crazy to think about. Think about all the things, growing up in the 70s and 80s, you had, that book, The Population Bomb. The only thing that the author actually got right was the spelling of his own name. It was wrong. The Malthusians have been with us for centuries, and they continue to be wrong. We are Americans. God gave us incredible talents and gifts to solve problems. Why don't we think about that? I want to make an economic argument. In the 70s and 80s, the world fought for hydrocarbons. Last decade, we fought for rare earths. In the future, we're going to fight for smart people. Why don't we start to fix our policies? And President Trump, to his credit, actually last week said, if you come to the United States and gotten a university degree and you can contribute to society, maybe we should keep you. That's from President Trump. So we've actually found the economic baselines that's saying you could grow by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars the size of the economy. Just keep the people who have talent. And my argument is talent could be a skilled carpenter or a synthetic biologist. But if you're going to grow a society at the same time, the number of children, remember, we are closing schools all over this country, except we don't like to talk about it because we don't have enough children. Maybe actually keeping those who pay taxes, grow the economy, make your life better, and maybe make you healthier. We should fix our immigration system. You lock down the border, you don't import poverty. All right, this is a non sequitur, but let's do it. The immorality of the open border, the cruelty. You're the family that your mom and dad didn't graduate high school. You basically sell your talent. You sell your willingness to work. You hang drywall. What happens when tomorrow I add 4, 5, 6, 7 million people with similar skill sets? What happened to your income? The data is showing that what the president did on the border has made poor people poorer. And then we're working on a paper right now to also show that when you add several million people with a limited housing stock, particularly the least expensive types of housing, much of the reason that inflation, that pricing went up. Border policy. You want to understand why you can't afford an apartment and you're working your heart out? Border policy, and it's economics, it's just math. Oh, David, you're not allowed to talk about that. Screw that, tell the truth. So let's walk through a few other things here. If I came to you and said, okay, David, interest and healthcare costs are the primary drivers of U.S. sovereign debt. Why don't we find the most moral approach to help our brothers and sisters who are sick? And there's an entire chapter in here that walks through math. And it has a point in here that drives people insane, but the math is good. Obesity may add to the United States $9.1 trillion of additional cost. Turns out the most powerful thing you could do to stabilize U.S. borrowing and the morality of letting people live longer, take on obesity. Is this place ready to have a conversation about changing the Farm Bill, nutrition support? Is it moral nutrition support wise to hand someone an EBT card to go buy onion rings? And then what are we going to do healthcare wise? The technology's out there. We've learned that obesity is not just about willpower. Our brains are all wired differently. That's absolutely certified now. Help our brothers and sisters. And the sidecar to that is we've known for decades 5% of our brothers and sisters who have multiple chronic conditions are over half of our healthcare spending. The data set for this 5%, majority are obese. Help them. Don't mock them. Don't shame them. Help them. The morality of having a society, once again, when you're having your 5th year of prime age males dying younger, and we've looked at the data, it's drugs. No, turns out drugs is way up there. Just above drugs, it's actually obesity. I would argue this place is absolutely immoral because of its unwillingness to tell the truth. So, if I come to you and say the Joint Economic Report spent years putting together the data and refining the data to demonstrate that the excess healthcare costs of obesity to this country over the next 10 years is $9.1 trillion. Why isn't this an alarm bell? I mean, we've gotten some very nice editorials. Hey, it's neat that Mr. Schweikert's willing to tell the truth about where the real driver of debt and deficits are and things we could actually fix. But the brain trust around here, well, let's raise taxes. Let's just cut things. Doesn't get you even close. Change policy. Oh, but changing policy would require thinking, and we'd have rooms full of lobbyists that don't want us to change their business models. We'll have bureaucracies that will have to think differently. Well, I'm going to show you in a couple other slides, you can replace much of the bureaucracies with AI, which is another thing we need to do. Remember, I did a whole presentation here a year ago that in the United States, 33% of all healthcare spending is diabetes, mostly type 2. 31% of Medicare. 31% of Medicare. Remember, I showed you Medicare is now the primary driver of U.S. debt along with interest. 31% of Medicare is now diabetes. If we could actually help our brothers and sisters, why don't we do it? Because we have an industry around us that needs sick people. It's about the money. It's not about solving their misery. Many of the Democrats keep offering these plans saying, well, we're going to... Okay, instead of me being a complete jerk here, over and over and over, if you look at the differences in how we approach policy, my brothers and sisters on the left, let's build more clinics so we can help people manage their misery. And our side, we keep saying, but we're seeing research, there's a cure. Move the money, cure people. Ending someone's misery is much better than helping them maintain it. It's radically different views of the morality of cures. And then when I come to you and say, if you took this number on, it would be one of the single biggest things you could do to save Medicare in its future. And end a hell of a lot of misery of our brothers and sisters who are older. So let's actually walk through actual solutions. Let's see. I want to give you, if I came to you right now, what's the single biggest thing you could do to disrupt spending? And you said, I'm going to give you 6 months to do it. I need you to do a revolution today. I need you to actually think like a utopian economist. And you can execute it. 16% of all U.S. health care is calculated to be people not taking their statin, their calcium inhibitor. Can you believe I have hypertension? Madam Speaker, can you believe I'm wound a little tie? And as long as I take my calcium inhibitor, apparently I won't stroke out. So the pill is just a few pennies. Well, it turns out we could help our brothers and sisters with a little 99-cent pill cap that beats you in the morning saying, hey, you really should take your drugs so you stay healthy. We calculate this to be almost $600 billion this year. 16% of healthcare is about $600 billion. How about just the technology of having this stupid thing beep at you in the morning and say, hey, did you check your insulin? Did you take your calcium inhibitor? Did you take your statin? Maybe the pill bottle cap that beeps in you in the morning. This stuff all exists. It's incredibly cheap. We could do it. And we have lobbyists here who oppose trying to get people healthy. It's just absurd. So let's actually walk through a couple other technology solutions. Madam Speaker, may I ask for my time?
The gentleman has 5 minutes remaining.
All right, thank you, Madam Speaker. To the gentleman from Texas, I think I'm going to go about 10 more minutes, then it's yours. All right. So what would happen if I came to you tomorrow and said, hey, you know that thing you can wear in your wrist? The FDA about 3 weeks ago said for your heart, it's a medical device. Apple got its watch certified as a medical device because the next generation is so good managing heart. What if there's the Dexcom or something else you can put on your arm over the counter that helps you manage your blood glucose? What if there's the thing you can blow into that says, hey, you have a virus, we're going to order your antivirals? Those technologies actually exist. And this place layer after layer after layer of bureaucratic crap to make it from being able to write you a script. My understanding is the AMA is going to oppose me in my election because I'm trying to cut the price of health care and make your life healthier and better. And unlike the Democrats who play these stupid games of, well, we're going to help people get their insulin less expensive, let's give Big Pharma $16 billion and we'll buy down the price. How about doing things to actually make it so the co-ops like Civica RX down the street that makes insulin cheaper? Why wouldn't we have promoted crashing the price instead of subsidizing Big Pharma? It's actually insane. The left wants you basically industrial policy to control you. We want markets to crash the price and make people healthier. Legalize the technology. It's moral. People have the right to take care of themselves. They have the right to be healthy. They have the right to use this technology. And this place substantially keeps it illegal. So let's do some other things. What happens if I could adopt artificial intelligence to make your life having to deal with government better, faster, cheaper, and a lot more accurate? So we're working on an experiment with the IRS. And it's still crap. There was a report that came out just a couple days ago saying, hey, only about 80% of the calls are getting answered, which is dramatically better than 4 or 5 years ago, where it was like 5% of the calls. But we have a level of AI chat, because you build a stack and it's just an expert on this. It's not Terminator, it's not a generative AI that says, I just need help on this form. How do I fill it out? If you use technology, the voice will stay on the phone with you. It will help you fill out your form. It'll even email or text you the form you need, maybe even send you the video so you know how to do it. You could crash the cost of government by adopting technology. IRS has already hired like 6,000 more people to answer the phone. What's the pension cost on that? I'm not being mean. At some point, I got to figure out how to finance these things. When technology would have been faster, better, more accurate, and you could have called it in the middle of the night. How do I get, well, it turns out I have gotten some of this. At least my brothers and sisters here, they've actually helped me. For the VA, for the IRS, for the Pentagon, we've actually been able to get a number of our AI amendments to do things like this. We actually got attached to the NDAA something called the Audit Act. Turns out I think we're in like our 8th year where the audits of the Pentagon has been incapable of knowing the assets. The audit of the Pentagon is a failure. They can't audit it. It's unauditable. Turns out we were able to get amendments attached saying, just use technology. Let the technology crawl through the data, every invoice, every receipt, every this, every that, and find where the hell are all the assets. We think there's $4 trillion of assets we can't identify in the Pentagon. It's absurd. And a technology package solves that. I've offered this for years. I used to go, David, we can't do that. Turns out this year, maybe I am making some progress because this got attached. We're finally going the right direction. So let's actually walk through a couple other things. AI's integration could add trillions of dollars to the global economy. There's a point out there that on the high end, if we allowed technology to make governments more efficient, society more efficient, you could add a few $1 trillion in global expansion. Remember how before I was talking about what happens if the world is flat population growth-wise? Where do you get the productivity? Remember your high school economics class. What are the two ways you're paid more? Inflation, well, that's crap because you basically tread water. Productivity, your salary goes up because of productivity. Help the productivity enter our country and the world. Let's have a more prosperous country. Just one or two more. How many of you hear complaints over and over and over and over and over from patients, from doctors, from hospitals, from clinics, from insurance companies? Everyone's mad at each other. Oh, they don't pay my claim. Oh, they don't do the claim right. We have a piece of legislation called Clean Claims. Just use technology to do it. We estimate for many medical clinics and doctors, we can cut their costs in half. What would happen to your price of getting health care if the doctor, the clinic, the surgery center you go to, its overall cost is half? You want to change the price of health care. Do you do it by just changing the financing? Because that's all Obamacare was. Remember, Obamacare was a financing bill. It moved from who pays here to who gets subsidized. It just moved it to these folks get subsidized, so these people get to pay. In reality, we just borrow the money now. Those are financing bills. They don't change what we pay. The technology changes what we pay. We've had multiple amendments we got put together to actually even study how we do things better, faster, cheaper, and healthier. But instead of just putting a room full of people together, it turns out AI can do the study in days and tell us how we could help our veterans have better, healthier outcomes and crash the price. We were able to get this attached. So we're starting to make some progress. And we did the same thing in other parts to create, we were able to move $1 million around to actually administer veterans benefits better, faster, cheaper, and you don't need an army of people to do it. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, in a moment I'm going to yield to the gentleman from Texas because he needed a couple of minutes to share some things. But I want to make the point. The Joint Economic Committee Republicans didn't just do the typical sniping at the Democrats or the president. We worked through the math and the scale of the actual problems ahead of us. And then we actually laid out ways we could make a better, healthier, more productive, more prosperous society. Is this body actually capable of reading a couple chapters, working with us and saying, okay, maybe we could adopt some policies that crash borrowing, grow the economy, and make everyone's lives better? Because that's our argument, that there's a path. The other dystopian part, though, is I think we only have 3 to 5 years, and then at that part, the bond market runs your country. Because everything we do will be to keep the bond market from ever getting nervous. Because we calculate this year a single basis point. 1 point of interest is 100 basis points. A single basis point is $800 million. Meaning sometimes when the clown show, the members of Congress here do dumb things, we can actually see the market stressing out. And sometimes just because someone here says something outrageous, the next day it costs you a few $1 billion in additional interest. Because remember, we're still borrowing $80,000 to $100,000 a second every day. And do those of us who are baby boomers, do I have a moral obligation to keep your retirement solid, but also not destroy the future of the younger generation? We can do it. You're just going to have to sort of realize the solution's complex, and there's a way to get there. And Madam Speaker Pro Tem, I'd like to yield whatever remaining time there is to the gentleman from Texas.